Good afternoon, everyone. The board specially called meeting for May 28th is now in session. Board, this meeting is called to discuss an update on the superintendent search.
I'd like to move that we add a closed session to the beginning of the agenda for to discuss personnel. And I'd also like, can these be or all in one motion? I'd like to move as well that we add a closed session to the end of the meeting to discuss personnel. Second.
Been moved by Ms. Chavez, seconded by Ms. Byer. Is there any other discussion? All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
All opposed, please use the same sign. It passes unanimously. So for the public who are watching, we will go into closed session. We'll come back out and we have a report from our partners at Alma Advisory Group who will share the community updates from all the engagement that they have done. And then we will go back into closed session. Thank you all.
I move that we go into closed session
Second.
for personnel reasons as discussed previously.
Second.
Yes, I move that we go into closed session to discuss attorney-client personnel information as discussed.
Second.
It's been moved by Ms. Byer and seconded by Ms. Chavez that we go into closed session. Any other discussion? All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed, please use the same sign. It passes unanimously. We're now in closed session. We are back in open session. We're going to turn it over to our partners at Alma. I think they might be coming in the Zoom room, so we might have a little delay before we get started.
And Bettina, we're here and we can hear you. Can you see us now?
Awesome. I can hear you, but I think we'll
Okay.
give us a minute and we'll be able to see you. There you
Take
go.
your time. Great. And Naja and I are going to co-present portions of this, so just hope that that works. Awesome. Thank you.
It
Great.
does.
And I'm going to go ahead and share my screen.
Right. Thank you all.
Oh, I'm not able. Never mind. I think the permissions are just updated. Perfect. Thank you so much to whoever has just granted me access. And if you all will just give me a thumbs up if you can see the cover of my screen.
We can.
Awesome. Thank you so much. Great. Oops. Now I'm getting ahead of myself. Awesome. Okay for me to just dive right in?
It is. If y'all want to do a quick introduction for the public who's watching tonight.
Absolutely. And first, good evening to the board. Good evening to any other team members who are present this evening. And good evening to members of the community that may be watching this presentation. My name is Eliana Pereira, and I am the Chief of Staff with Alma Advisory Group. I'm also playing the role of supporting community engagement efforts and project managing on the Durham Superintendent search. And thrilled to be here with you all. And I'm also joined by my colleague, Naja, who I'll allow to introduce himself as well.
Hello, everyone. My name is Naja Thompson, a part of the Alma Advisory Group. I had the sheer pleasure of being in Durham on site, listening to a variety of community stakeholder groups and looking forward to sharing some of our summaries tonight.
Great. Thank you so much. So as we both noted, we're excited to share the community engagement report that we produced coming off the heels of our site visit earlier this month, which I can't believe we're already at this point in the process, which is very exciting. I know you've all had an opportunity to receive the report in advance. So we are not going to go through each and every one of the 42 slides, but we'll be sure to zoom in on specific parts that we think are particularly impactful, that we'll want to highlight for you all, and then certainly open to any questions at any point in the process that you all may have for us. So we'd like to dive right in if it's okay. And like I said, we'll keep moving us forward, but would love to take any questions that you all have for us as we move forward. Okay, so with that, I'll share just a quick overview of our roadmap for this evening. We'll start with just a very brief update on recruitment efforts, dive into the specifics of the report, and then just quickly talk about some of the implications for the job profile before we share next steps. So again, just as always, we like to come back to our shared purpose. And one of the key things to note here is that this report out is part of the example of that value, right, of being guided by the community voice in this process, and the transparency of sharing back, here's what we heard, and honoring all of the time and input that members of the community, staff, students, and families shared with us earlier this month. Briefly, always want to come back to our timeline. We're at this interesting kind of midway point in the process, and really our focus as we continue to move forward is going to be recruitment, interviews, and then preparing for that finalist stage, which we'll touch on as we close out our engagement together this evening. Quick recap of some of the key activities that our team has completed to date. Certainly the community engagement portion has been a major part of our work to date, hosting all of the virtual and in-person sessions, as well as completing the survey, and then the initial recruitment that has been completed for the role. As I just noted, part of what comes next is continual recruitment. Like Sylvia says, always be recruiting. And that's our motto, as well as continuing with the interviews so that we can really get to that goal of moving into the end of this month, hopefully finalizing our selection process. So again, just want to remind us about the current stages of the process that we are working towards. We are in the midst, and our team has really been taking the lead around reviewing the initial set of applicants, screening those to make the recommendations to the board for the next round of interviews, which will have already begun. And we're very excited to be supporting this process. As we continue to move forward, we will continue to support you all. At each stage, we will debrief and make recommendations about who moves forward. Again, as I noted just a moment ago, this finalist stage will be a really critically important part as the board, as well as this volunteer panel of community members, will also have an opportunity to engage with your finalists. So in terms of where we are with recruitment efforts to date, again, lots of interest in this role is something we continue to see. And so to date, and this is as of Friday numbers, we've received 109 applications. This is the breakdown by race and ethnicity and gender. Again, all of this is based on self-reported data from our EEO survey, which not everyone completed, but about 93 applicants have completed, which is how we've been able to identify this data. Again, we're tracking recent superintendents who are applying for the role. So that's a data point we'll continue to share with you all, as well as North Carolina specific experience. Okay, so we're gonna get into the report itself. And before I dive in, I just want to take a moment just to thank and appreciate all of the staff members who helped put this together. Sheena Cooper and her team, Crystal Roberts, Nicole, who helped us with a lot of scheduling, the translation team, and then there are other folks who I don't have names for, but I do want to call out just folks who were there to welcome us at the different buildings where we hosted meetings and allowed us in, the custodial staff who continuously checked in on us and made sure we were okay, we were comfortable, and the tech team who was there ready and on hand to help us ensure we knew how to plug our things in and that everything was working to create a really positive experience. So just thank you so much, because I know that's a lot to pull off and we greatly appreciate it. So a quick summary of all of the meetings and the outcomes of our engagement during that time. We always want to maximize participation from the community, and we do so through a variety of methods, both in-person meetings that are one-to-one or focus groups. We hosted virtual sessions, and then we put out the community survey, which again allows us to cast a wider net. For this engagement in particular, we also did 2 separate surveys. We did a community-facing as well as a student survey so that we can gather input directly from your student body. We'll share the insights of that in just a moment. And everything we did was done in both English and Spanish to maximize participation from the community. We were really happy ultimately with the outcome of the survey results, as well as the number of community meetings that we hosted over the course of our time in Durham earlier this month, as well as some virtual follow-up sessions we hosted afterwards. Your community partners in particular were very generous with their time and were really great at responding and providing support to us in this process. Of the 43 organizations that were on that partner list, 24 reached out to us and either set up time to connect with us personally or shared information about the search process to their constituents and the members of the community that they serve. This is a full list of the partners that ultimately we met with, which span a great variety of members of your community and services that are being provided across the spectrum in Durham. We learned a lot about this experience, and again, it really highlighted the incredible partnerships available for families and for the district, and the support ultimately that the community is providing the district on a continual basis. So it was really wonderful to be able to hear all of these perspectives. This is a breakout of our community and student survey. So in totality, we received just over 2,600 responses. of which 1,635 represent your community members. I just want to note that if you try to add up the numbers, they may not add up. People were allowed to check all that apply. So I could be a parent and staff member. That only counts for one survey response in the count, but it just means that we have many more connections to the district defined in this breakdown of the survey. The students, again, I think this is like the highest number of student responses we've received to date, which is so exciting. And we're just thrilled to have received just shy of 1,000 responses from students representing all of your schools in the district. We are, and I'm going to quickly walk through these different data points. We ask people to identify race, ethnicity. In a moment, we'll look at LGBTQIA status. We'll look at disability, special learning needs, neurodivergence, as a way to understand the types of perspectives that we're getting from different parts of your community. This is not atypical for survey responses where we see higher response rates from our Caucasian and white members of the community. So those perspectives are overrepresented in the survey. And because of that, that trend we've seen, it's one of the reasons why we tend to really emphasize the need to connect with organizations that are surveying Black, Latino, Asian in your case here, but other members of your community, they may not be showing up as strongly in the survey as a way to balance those perspectives in our work. So here's a quick breakdown of what the community survey respondents, and again, this is just for the adults, for those 1,635 respondents on the community survey, what the breakdown of their either identification with or being caregivers of someone who identifies as LGBTQIA. They're about 15% of respondents identified with that community. And then in terms of the question about, are you a caregiver of or identify as a person with a disability who is neurodivergent or receiving special education services, we received almost 33% of your respondents agreed with that data point. So we're very happy with the representation from that community there. We asked folks to share with us their income levels. Again, we want to get a sense of the socioeconomic status of community members. This was more representative of the county, and so we compared this with county data, and that lined up. We also asked people to identify the zip code that they live in as another way to assess where the respondents are coming from. And we hit about 15 different zip codes in the Durham County area, with over 300 who opted not to respond, and about 37 families who noted they were in transitional housing or in the midst of moving. And then I'll turn it over to Naja.
Yeah, thank you. So now we get into student voices. And like Eliana mentioned, this is probably one of the highlights of the survey and our time on site, with 966 survey respondents, which is a great number of students responding to the survey. And we were also able to meet with the Student Advisory Council, which consisted of 23 high school students across the district. And also students that completed the survey. Those groups also consisted of multilingual learners, students with IEPs, students that are part of alternative programs, and like I mentioned, the Student Advisory Council as well. So this highlights the diversity of representation and lived experiences in the student survey, and something your district should be proud of. The student survey responses closely mirrored the racial demographics of the district, especially amongst students of color groups. So although one group was overrepresented, there was representation from every racial group identified in the survey, right? So that is something to applaud, and we look forward to sharing what we heard from students later tonight. So this chart illustrates more of the diversity and representation in the student survey. Around 17% of students self-identified as someone with a disability, neurodivergent, in special education, or with a diverse learning need. So in addition, we had about 72% that disclosed they do not have a disability, and about 12% that preferred not to answer.
So what have we learned? And what we're going to do over the course of the next few slides is synthesize what we heard during our, so it's all of the qualitative input that we gathered from the focus groups and the interviews conducted over the course of the last month. So we'll highlight some of those, and then we'll dive into how that looks from the perspectives of those who responded to the survey. We'll start with strengths, and certainly there were very many strengths to celebrate, highlight, and there was a lot of coherence and alignment around the types of experiences that that folks shared with us as key strengths to sustain for the district. So right off the bat, the reputation of Durham as a county, as a city, as a very diverse, inclusive, and progressive city is something that really stood out. Particularly its location in the Southeast. Stakeholders shared just the importance of understanding the long legacy and history of the city, as well as what's happening currently with industries and innovations and the continual growth of the city as important context that both they wanted to uplift as a strength of the community, but also to share as important context that leaders should know about Durham. The other two bullets, and I'll go through these quickly, but again, happy to pause for questions. Some of the key things that came up with regards to what's happening in the district is the recognition of all of the work that's happening to ensure steady academic growth for students. And this came up in just about almost every conversation I know I had while we were on site. People really appreciate and see that directionally the district is making the right investments and is moving in the right direction. The number of schools that are low performing is going down. We're seeing steady increases in student performance, closing of gaps, although again, that's another area that came up as a strength, as an opportunity as well. But that continual progress is seen and is being made, and want to ensure that those investments and that work continues with a new administration. Along those same lines, stakeholders, and this includes students, really appreciated the types of programming and resources that are being dedicated to ensure that students have access to really innovative programs, pathways, and the different services that are being provided. The list here is just a small snippet of some of these specific examples that community members shared with us about the things that they really value and again want to see protected and championed by a new administration. These are kind of our last two just big highlights and headlines that came up in conversations. This value of for the equity work that is happening at the district came up from staff members. We heard it from community partners, which is a little less common in some other school districts. We heard this from parents. We heard it from students. And this seems to be a real shared value about not just what equity means, but also the investments that are being made to see that work continue. That unapologetic focus, the unapologetically, there was another way that someone else framed that I thought was really cool, but I didn't include here. Just continue to come up, and folks felt really proud of the fact that the district is really bold in its efforts to continue to push this work forward. Last but not least, I'll share that, and this one becomes important, and you'll see in a moment as to why while there are a lot of opportunities and a lot came up around staff retention, there was also a lot of input that came up about the things that the district is doing really well to retain and attract staff. So competitive wages is something that came up right off the bat from across different groups, as well as all of the opportunities to grow your own that are really valued, particularly by members of your leadership and your principals, who really called out programs like Growing Together as really important for their own development and continual growth within the district.
So this is a summary of the student group we were able to meet with. Although it was only 23 students, they had a lot to share that's captured here. I won't go through the laundry list, but a lot of the great points that have already been mentioned was the pathway and specialty programming, right? The tech, CTE, early college. They showed great appreciation for those programs and hoping that will continue in the years to come. Also the rigor in AP classes that they enjoyed, and also district-wide activities such as wellness days to support their mental health. In the areas of improvement, there was some overlap with the greater community regarding a culture of equity and care across schools. Students expressed that some schools get greater attention and access than other schools, and the desire to seek greater equity of access and opportunity across the district. Something we heard across groups, and in this group, was the achievement gap, noting that there's a distinct and large gap and something they hope the district will address. They also mentioned hopes for greater diversity of students and teachers in those higher level courses. In regards to students with disabilities, students express the need for greater inclusion of students with disabilities, given that they've witnessed students being othered in school activities, which was quite a concern for them, and also improve building maintenance and facilities to make it more accessible for students with disabilities. Students share their experience of when a teacher or staff member resigns in the middle of the school year and how that has an effect on their learning. So greater staff retention and continuity across the school year. And other comments from our conversation included timely and transparent communication from administration regarding school safety. Sometimes they felt as if when school events happen that were unfortunate, they were left in the dark, and just wanting to be more informed as to what's happening. So lastly, it was a joy to witness the pride students have. And the last bullet there, one student mentioned that they have a banner in one of their schools as being named one of the best high schools in the state, and wanting to get their school back on top, right? And achieve that recognition again. So that was nice.
Sorry about that.
No, you're good.
I'm going to go through these slides a little more quickly, but essentially what we do is we look at the qualitative data, and then we take a look at what we pulled from the input collected through the survey. Again, as a way to like validate some of what we heard as we move forward. So in terms of the priorities, and again, this is zooming in on the community survey in particular. So the priorities that are most important for the next leader to bring in as they step into this role, there was alignment around some of these, and with a key focus around rebuilding trust with the community was an area of focus across the different roles. So this is inclusive, and I'm sorry, let me give you a little orientation around all the color codes here in the bars, where that teal color represents all survey respondents. And then we're looking at this breakout by role. So the blue represents parents and caregivers or family members. The two purples represent staff. And we did a breakout by teachers and certified versus classified. In some instances, you might see some differences between more of your operational and support versus your instructional facing educators, although there was some alignment for the most part with the data that we saw. But the key things that were most important from these groups as we looked at them was attracting, retaining, and supporting leaders, educators, and staff as a top priority across groups, no matter how you cut it. Strengthening district finances, which is not a surprise. And then, like I said, rebuilding trust in the community. We looked at this data also by demographic information, and that's where it the spread of those priorities. So there were about 13 priorities that we listed in the survey. Of those, these 6 came up as the top priorities. And of these 6, there was real focus across the different demographic groups in these 2 areas. And that's, again, attracting, retaining, and supporting staff as a top priority, no matter what demographic group you look at. and then rebuilding trust. I do want to point out there's some variation here and some key things, which will be important as we look at the opportunities to address. So for example, if we're looking on the priority area for see, value, and listen to our families and community, the dark blue band at 4.78 represents the responses from your Hispanic and Latino population. And we'll see that coming up as a specific opportunity area in just a moment. But that was a real key need or priority for that community. When we look at increasing student achievement and preparedness for future endeavors, the 4.8, that's third column, if you're reading from the left to the right, was a top priority for African American and Black community members in particular, second, Latino community members as well, which is not a big surprise, again, given some of the info we heard about continuing to address achievement gaps between students. So those were some just key things to know as we were looking at this data.
Just something quickly to lift up from this slide. There were some variation from the community survey respondents versus a student survey. But one thing that was clearly lifted up was school safety and security, right? So that rising to the top of importance for students as something to be addressed.
And it wasn't an area that came up even in that top 6 priority areas for the community-wide survey, which we thought was really interesting. So in terms of opportunities, and there are about, I think we landed on about 6 key opportunities that are important to lift up through this effort. So again, that need to rebuild trust, which we also saw come up in the survey data. But to rebuild trust within the district and the community, it really came up loud and clear across conversations we had, and the effects of the salary study continue to be felt across the community, and both staff and community members mentioned the need to ensure that there's just greater accountability needed, but also the idea of promoting a culture that welcomes more questioning so that people feel safe asking the tough questions that would make, you know, something like this happening again more difficult or impossible. It was just something, again, that came up more pronounced. It seemed more pronounced for staff members, but it's something definitely that is continuing to ripple across the community. And given its recency, that is no surprise. The other area that came up as an area of opportunity, and Naja also noted this through the student input, is the exceptional children's services. Staff, parents, also students shared challenges with the program, issues that come from a lack of staffing to appropriately support or meet student needs, staff not appropriately leveraging systems like MTSS or PBIS programs, and families also shared challenges just getting staff to meet requirements for mandates for students with IEPs in particular as areas of concern. In terms of this last bullet, the improved and expanded mental health and social support services came up as another area of need. And what we heard frequently was that for social workers and counselors, there seem to be really large caseloads, so they're not always able to respond to needs of students, particularly when there is a crisis happening. So we heard examples from students and families who share very just difficult examples of them having to navigate a serious issue or circumstance and having to wait long periods of time, or navigating some confusing scheduling requests in order to make that availability happen for their students. On this next slide, and I've hinted to this one, but it's important to call out the experiences of your Latinx community in particular. We heard this in both focus groups and, as I noted in the survey, this idea of not feeling seen, valued, or listened to is something that came up consistently. Community partners shared examples of how they've stepped in to help meet some of those gaps and would like to better coordinate efforts with the district in order to help meet those needs, whether it be to support newcomers into the district in enrolling for schools, securing services. We also heard examples of just not feeling welcomed when they're going to schools or not having someone available to welcome them at the front desk, for example, as they're trying to navigate the various different systems of the school district. The next bullet, again, around the staffing, we heard a lot of great things, but we've also heard that there's a real need to focus on recruiting and retaining staff with a real emphasis on staff that match the student demographics that the district is now serving. And I know the focus have been greatly on teachers, but also came up in the context of leadership retention in the district as well. Our last 2 points are about implementation of specific processes. So restorative practices is something that came up as something that people really valued and wanted to see more resources, training, and support to ensure that these are appropriately implemented. There was a small group of stakeholders that highlighted that the current state of RJ in the district has led some schools to really see confusion about how to really address disciplinary matters. And so additional support and clarity would be needed there. And then lastly was overall, and this we heard more so from staff, but the need to really strengthen the operational processes in the district. There's places where there are some lacking processes or where current and existing processes may not be fully understood. So additional training may be required just to ensure implementation with fidelity. And part of it came up in the context of so much of the disruption that was caused by COVID. And so not yet feeling like they're fully back to where they were before the pandemic. I'm not going to spend too much time on this one. We asked kind of the same set of questions a few different ways to help us validate the input and insights from the community. This was part of an open text response in the survey. And the question is, Durham Public Schools will be successful if we accomplish these 3 things in the next 5 years. And again, some of the key things to know up top is the community survey responses. So again, that's from your adults. Students are at the bottom in purple. Of those who opted to respond, these were kind of their big 3, if you will, in the next 5 years, which again, really align with what we saw in the data previously. This is the last question we have in the survey. And again, it's just an open question asking people to share anything else that they want us to know about this process. In the community survey, about 571 people opted to share an answer. And just some of the key things that I thought were really interesting was really wanting an experienced superintendent with a track record of success, and someone who will be able to work well. So really a leader that's focused in on culture and climate. From the students' perspective, 204 took the time to answer that. And again, what came up for them was a student who will care about and support students, as well as being a really good listener. In conversations, there were a few key things that kept coming up. We've hinted at some of these, so I won't go through, but just really understanding the context, the place and space that Durham is in at this point in time will be really important for an incoming superintendent to know about. These are also some key things we're sharing as we're having conversations with people interested in the role. We want to make sure that people have the right information, that they have really good information about what's happening in the district, both the opportunities, the exciting things that are happening, as well as where there's places where it will be important to really support and strengthen these areas of opportunity. But just wanted to call out some of the ones that came up for us in conversations with members of your community. We've talked a lot about the very engaged community partners and members of your community. So thinking about a leader who can really build strong partnerships and coalitions is something that also came up in conversations. Again, we've talked about the context of the city in relation to a more conservative state, and how your state legislature at times is working in opposition to some of the stated values of your community is something that's important to know, and for a leader to be able to navigate skillfully. We've touched on the effects of the pay issue and studies, so I won't get into that one. I do want to call out that while there is strong alignment around the values for equity, what that means and what that looks like for different pockets of your community is very different, particularly when we get into the context and conversations about resource allocation and programming. And so again, how this showed up in conversations was around the need for a courageous leader is the term that people use most frequently, in wanting someone who can really, again, build a coalition to really get stakeholders to move in that shared, around the shared vision for what this means for the district. And then last but not least, ensuring that there's a leader who really understands the value that so many of the community and Durham place on the partnership and relationship with the DEA. So that's the report in its totality. I'm going to take a pause and see if there's any initial questions I can respond to. Otherwise, we can dive into the last few slides, which really just get to the implications for the job profile. I will preview for you that ultimately we saw a lot of alignment between the current job profile and what we heard from the community. So we're not really recommending any changes. Any of the questions that came up in conversations, we actually noted that there are sub-bullets within the current set of competencies and responsibilities that address that. So I'm happy to keep going and close us out unless you all have any questions before I move forward.
Let me pause and see if we have any questions, Eliana. Board members, any questions around the report and what we've heard so far? Giving a pause, I'm seeing Okay, no questions, Eliana, so we can keep moving.
No problem. I hope that means, we've answered your questions so far.
Well, it's
but as
yeah, I was gonna say it's a very thorough report, and I think you can't see, but a lot of like heads nodding here as we're listening and processing all the information. I really appreciate the way y'all have gathered it and made it into a digestible report for us.
I appreciate that. And any feedback for us would always be greatly appreciated. I know it's a lot of information to process, and so appreciate y'all reviewing this with us. So this last piece really is about what are the implications from what we learned for the job profile. And again, we typically will do the engagement first and then create the profile. Because of our timing, we swap things out, and it's okay. It's worked out in our favor. I mean, the job profile is a living document, and that's always the stance that Alma takes. So we are able to make refinements to that at any point in time. But we were actually excited to see the amount of alignment that existed around the skills that are most important for a leader as we continue through this process across members of a community. So again, we looked at the data, and this is again from the community survey. We looked at the data by role. So the light blue represents all survey, the blue is parents, and the two purples represent staff. These are five top areas really aligned across different groups. Clear communicator and collaborator, which is already reflected in the job profile. Excellent organization and project management is one of those sub-bullets under one of the responsibility areas, and I'll share that in just a moment. Understanding district finances, innovative problem solver, and a reflective leader that is a continual learner are the top 5 skills that emerged from the survey. When we looked at the data by demographic group, again, the top areas: clear communicator, understanding finances, innovative problem solver. and then reflective leader and continuous improvement. Tied for 5, I would say, is probably the excellent organization and project management, as well as a supporter and developer of leaders in the district. Also as students, which we do not want to forget about, but also still some alignment there.
And I would just note in the next slide from the focus group, many of the students lifted up a lot of the concerns that were addressed in the student survey as well. Some of those being fiscal responsibility, someone with a strong background in finance and budgeting, someone that is a clear communicator, empathetic, genuine, and visible in the community, and not just a superintendent that's able to work well with adults, but someone that's able to connect with people of all ages, right? And consistently seeks insight from students and their lived experiences.
Thanks, Naja. So the implications for the job profile, and I do want to call this out because it came up in conversations we had while we were on site, and I want to be responsive to the feedback we received. There were some stakeholders who felt that they wanted greater emphasis on like operational effectiveness and efficiency and didn't quite see it in the headlines for the job profile. But as we dug into the different bullet points for this particular responsibility area highlighted in purple, and even within the systems perspective competency area, we do find specific bullets that tie into the areas that were more concerns for the community. And the specific one to call out is the bullet around steward the success, sustainability, and equity of the district's finances and operations, which we thought was covered there. The other one to note was that, again, the responsibility area around ensuring success and equitable experiences of our students was a top factor. And then the strong racial equity competency area is one that came up as a real top priority for students. And it's already reflected in our competencies for this next leader. So our recommendation at this point is to keep the job profile as is, because we feel it's encompassing of the feedback we heard from the community. And there's a great deal of alignment between what we heard in the early stages of community engagement, which included conversations with members of the board. There's just a lot of alignment. And so the totality of everything we heard continues to affirm the direction that we're moving in. So to wrap up, I just want to highlight, and I know we're still working through some of our scheduling, but some of our upcoming meetings scheduled, we're still working on some timing for a few. And thank you all so much for all of the time and commitment that you are making in this process. We know it's a great deal of time and effort on your part as well, and just appreciate your partnership and the generosity of your time as we continue to move forward. On our end, we're excited to be supporting this next stage of the process. So while we're moving into the round 2, we're also preparing for the finalist stage. And so we'll want to continue to push out information about that volunteer community panel that can participate in the interview process. And we'll be excited to share that with our partners as well, so they can also help get the word out to their constituents to get that information out to additional families and members of the community that may want to participate at that stage. And lastly, just ensuring that we've got all of our time slated moving forward so we can continue to support this process and this work. And that's what we got. We so appreciate you all. Thank you for sticking with us. I know it's a lot to walk through, and just really appreciate the thoughtfulness of what you bring to this process.
Thank you so much, Eliana and Naja, for the presentation and the walkthrough. It's good to see the alignment and also see the areas where we got some work to do, that we where our community is asking for the emphasis. So that's really appreciated. Board members, questions or comments? Ms. Chavez?
Yeah, I just wanted to say thank you so much. This is so rich. I appreciate the way you gave us the breakdown of who said what. Really love the insights from our students. And you can see that they have keen, obviously day-to-day insight on what are some challenges or needs of our district. but also that they're paying attention to sort of larger structural issues. And so really, yeah, just really appreciate that. I have just one scheduling question with June 3rd. I think I want to confirm that we said 4:30 to 8:30 for that meeting, and just put that out there so everybody can block off that time. I know it's hard to find time that works for everyone.
I know.
Yes, 4:30 to 8:30.
I'll update that right now. And we'll add that to our confirmed slate. Thank you for that.
Thank you.
Sorry, Ms. Carter Alton.
I also wanted to express gratitude and really do appreciate all of this data being fed back to us in a manageable way, and collected so thoughtfully. And I also had a question about the schedule of upcoming meetings. Do we also have interviews? Wait, is there something also on June 22nd? This is not including interviews, like this is just meetings?
That's the big one. Yes. So
Right.
the 22nd is what we currently confirmed for finalist day. And because there were still sessions and interviews being confirmed even as of Friday, there might have been some additional decisions that were made that are not reflective here. So yes, June 22nd will be a very important date. So yes, that needs to be a big hold on our calendars, if not already.
Thank you.
Thank you for that.
Any other questions, Ms. Byer?
No, I just want to express gratitude to you all for all your work, kind of engaging in our community in so many different ways, in ways that people were able to reach you and use the survey. I want our classified staff to know that we see you. We see you as most concerned about almost every aspect of leadership right now, because we are working to repair your trust. We see you and we hear you as we work forward. I think you are top of our hearts and minds, especially during this budget cycle. And then, it's disheartening for you all to share that a whole segment of our students and families don't feel seen and heard. And that is explicitly calling us to that work. So I appreciate all the truth that is in here, and the challenge in our community holding us accountable as we come together in this work. But it's important to see it and name it, and I appreciate y'all's help.
Anything else? Ms. Valladares?
I also want to express gratitude for just the thoroughness of this presentation. I wanted to hear a little bit more about there's a part at which the district is grappling with capacity for language, and especially folks that speak multiple languages. And when it comes to the demographics, there's always that question as to, who's being represented, right? Like, for example, what languages, what cultures, and all that. And so just wanted to provide a little bit of time for you all to kind of think about ways that this kind of meets representation, but ways that we can also continue to keep that in mind for the leader that we choose to continue to engage further, because this is not an end all be all. Like, engagement has to continue to happen. What are some opportunities? Just giving you all a little bit of space to talk about that nuance of representation with languages.
I appreciate that. And I think that, and I want to put this in context of the time of year in which we're doing the engagement, right, as we're moving into the end of the school year. But it was just interesting to note that although we prioritize Spanish as the language in which all of our communications and even the facilitation needed to happen, there wasn't space to also integrate other languages that are a part of the community. And so that, I think, created barriers right off the bat for other members of your community. There's a large portion of refugees and recent immigrants that are coming into your community that we weren't able to directly engage and connect with. And so just, and I'll just share through our own experience, having worked through the preparations for the communications and the surveying, the facilitation for the meetings. That was not something that was set up, and we asked about it, and I just wasn't sure if the structures are there to be able to support that. So it raises a question about how that's happening right now, across schools and across the system. And again, we prioritize organizations that are primarily serving, portions of your community that may not be often represented through something like a large survey, because that's just not a way that many communities feel comfortable or are able to access, right? It requires a device, it requires internet connectivity. And so, I think it would have been awesome to be able to maybe set up kiosks at the schools or at community centers. And I think had we had a longer runway, we could have been more thoughtful about how to establish those, or handing out paper surveys. I think that's been another effective way to hit on different portions of your community that we weren't able to, given the type of engagement that we set up. But I think there's a real opportunity there to really dig into other ways to connect with the community. I think your partners are a really great entry point into that. They have access, they know the community members, and those relationships really matter when establishing those relationships and those connections with these communities. Did that answer your question?
It did. I think, yes, I think that this is definitely a need that requires resources. And for example, one of the points of, I would say, like grief to some degree, is just the ways that the district has been limited by state funds, but also like in the ways that we have structured supports. So for example, we'd love to hire an in-house, full-time, interpreter for all the languages that are represented in the district. And that has to follow like the representation, the percentage of families, and how to continue to not rely on some of these vendors or contractors, which is what a lot of districts have to do, especially with limited FTEs, right? Like it's a full-time position. And it's one of the points of grief, I think, that we hold as a district in terms of investment funding that is actually about language access. And for our federal government to also realize that this is a national need, right? For schools to have representation. And so we continue to grapple with that in terms of diversity, linguistic diversity in our district. But I will also say there was something else about families navigating the system and how complex it is, and having, and that I really loved how that was captured in terms of families that have shared this with us many times, that they feel like they're going from one point to another point, and it's navigating the system is already complex. And so you're talking about these partners that sometimes they do elucidate, or they do kind of do the educational things, but for the groups that they engage, and that's not like a general thing. And so there is another request, like that families have kind of said, like for there to be more videos out there that kind of show how to navigate the system. Many folks have asked for these things. And again, these are points that the new leader kind of has to continue to hear these requests about families that want to be engaged, want educational opportunities, to figure out where to go. And there was something else in there that talked about quality. And I guess for me, the nuance of quality and quantity, because they're related. You will probably say the quality of something is not as great if the capacity is not there. And again, this is one of those things where it's like we can say that in the district, the quality of language access and interpretation is very much connected to the quantity and the resources and how available they are. So I think that that's also another thing to kind of keep in mind, how quantity and quality are intertwined in that way. Thank you.
And I think the other piece to add to that is that understanding the complexity of some of the systems, right? That families often, identifying where are those pain points. In the conversations, we heard many pain points around navigating special education services in particular. And I mean, for any of us, I've been through many a IEP meeting, and as a well-educated first-gen American, I really struggled to get through that process for my son when it came time for that. And I was in education. So I always think about families who are coming from another country that have very different systems or have not navigated systems within their respective home countries to then come into this country to navigate what is a very complex and unfortunately at times combative process. And how to set that up in a way that then also adds the additional layer of language access. And so an example that came up was, it's not enough to have someone who speaks Spanish, but you have to have someone who understands the special education terminology and parental rights in that so that they can appropriately support a parent in advocating for their child in that space. And so thinking about the balance of power in that dynamic, I think is really critically important. And this is not just unique to Durham, this is across the country, what we're seeing, but it's certainly an area where there's huge opportunities. Some of your groups and partners that are doing this and supporting parents and advocating and training them to go through this process were really great examples of how this can happen and where some strong partnerships can occur. But again, understanding the resources required of that is going to be important to fully actualize what I think the district would want to see as far as those services for all kids. But again, thinking through that additional layer of anyone needing language services or any newcomer to the country as well. How do you set that up in a way that balances that power dynamic to ensure that kids are ultimately getting what they need?
Muchas gracias.
Claro que sí, siempre a la orden.
Thank you all. Any other questions or comments from board members? Okay. Thank you, Eliana and Naja, for being here, presenting the report this evening. We look forward to having this and using it as a guide as we continue our process. Board, I'll take a motion to go into closed session.
Move that we go in closed session for personnel related reasons.
Second.
Been moved by Ms. Rogers, seconded by Ms. Valladares. Is there any other discussion? All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed, use the same sign. Passes unanimously. We are now adjourned. Excuse me, we're not adjourned. We're now moving to closed session. We're back in open session. Board, is there any other business? Right, with that, we are adjourned. Oh. Yes, the board is adding additional, excuse me, I was getting ready to dismiss us. The board is gonna add additional interview time, so they will be meetings on Saturday. What time would work for you all? 9 to 12? Aspire? Yeah. All right, we'll do 9 a.m. to 12. All right, with that, I think we are adjourned. Thank you all.